Hello and welcome back to the Undercut podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Thiemo and Ellie-May, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only Ellie-May Taylor. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm feeling clever.
Good. It's a good feeling. I suppose I don't know what to do with that, but it's good that you're feeling that way.
Have you ever watched the 1% Club?
No, I'm not that clever.
Ah, see, I got the 1% question, so
I imagine that's a
I'm
pretty
feeling
good
good.
feeling.
It is. So
That's about as smooth a segue as I go from that not being in these kind of uncharted territories. So we're also joined this week by Inside F2's Fraser Ford. How are you doing? Are you in the 1% club as well?
I'm definitely in the bottom 99% club, to be honest with you. Definitely not in the top 1% club. But yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be back on the podcast. It's been a little while. So yeah, looking forward to talking all things motorsport. So
Going to say it's been a little while since we've had you on, so very briefly, quick thoughts on the season so far.
yeah, it's been interesting, isn't it?
There's the
Has it been
politics answer,
interesting?
isn't it?
Has it? Yeah, exactly. Max Verstappen's run away with it, hasn't he? I do think, and I know people keep on banging on about it, but you take Max Verstappen out of the championship, and it's a great championship. It's maybe the best championship we've
If
had.
only that's how that works.
Exactly, yeah. In terms of competitiveness, it's 2012. So, but obviously Max isn't a ghost, and he is in the championship. And credit where credit's due. He's been absolutely brilliant, and you can't fault him at all. He's going to be a three-time world champion, probably more after this season as well. Let's face it; it's probably not going to be the last time he wins a championship, and he's well on his way to being one of the all-time greats, isn't he? So, we've been through this with Schumacher, with Hamilton in our lifetime, and there's been many more before that, whereby they've dominated the sport, and it's been the Schumacher era, the Hamilton era, and this is the Verstappen era. And I think we've just got to sit back, enjoy watching history as it happens, and definitely enjoy the racing in behind him, because other than that, it's been brilliant, hasn't it? So.
Pretty much as summed up as it can be there. It's kind of very interesting. And more so if you are a Max Verstappen fan, but if you're everyone else, you just like, we'll just get on with this. We know what to do at this point. As you say, Schumacher, Vettel, Hamilton, we've been here before. But we'll move on from that because we are back, of course, to talk about this weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix in particular. And as always, take a look at some of the news that's come out of the world of F1, which there isn't too much to do with that this week. There's the main bit of news just for this episode, which is essentially the Hungarian Grand Prix has been renewed on the F1 calendar until 2032, which is an extension on an extension because it was already signed up until 2028. So interesting that they've added another 4 years on top of that. And if we just base this off qualifying, a little bit going what you were saying, Fraser, if we look at it from just this point of view, you can see why it was given that bit of an extension. And a few races that we've had over the years, definitely more so than not, have been quite interesting. It's kind of this in between track of it maybe doesn't deserve a legacy status just yet in terms of a still Silverstone, a Spa, or a Monza, but it's definitely not one that deserves to be thrown in the bin either, I don't think.
yeah, I agree. I think you look at the past few years, Hungary has always had a sort of surprise within it. You had Ocon win in 2021 and out of almost nowhere. So yeah, it's a good track. So it definitely should stay.
I'll say Ricciardo win, Button's first win, Alonso's first win, I think, as well. And then Russell with the surprise pole last year, Hamilton surprise pole this year. It's kind of, there's always a lot of potential there, even if the race doesn't pan out accordingly. And even from an F2 and F3 perspective for Fraser, we do get some quite good action there as well. So it's nice that if it's on the F1 calendar, chances are feeder series stays there as well.
Yeah, no, I'm happy it's staying. I thought the route news was a bit random. I'm not going to lie. It still had 4 years on the deal, and it seemed a bit out of the blue to me. But yeah, as you say, it's. I'll be honest, it's not my favourite European track. As you say, it's not a Spa or a Silverstone or a Monza, for example. But it's not the worst. Is it? Qualifying was good this weekend. I still think it's ironic that the two highlights of the season for me this season have been Monaco qualifying and probably Budapest qualifying. Not a single race as the highlights of the season, but as you say, it does provide good racing every now and again, a few good races as you touched on there. So yeah, obviously happy it's staying, definitely.
Why do you think Hungary sort of gets forgotten about? Because even if you look we look at the stands from previous races, they've pretty much been packed. Whilst you look at this race, and there was quite a few gaps. Hungary isn't exceptionally expensive from what I sort of know. So why do you think it's sort of being ignored?
No, it is one of those cheaper tracks to go to if you compare it to many other circuits. I think Japan is one of the other cheaper ones, which is getting a bit weird considering how mad they are for motorsport in general. They're not just Formula One, especially in recent years. But going back to Hungary, I don't know. I think maybe it's just one of those ones, like you say. There's nothing exceptional about it necessarily, but there's nothing terrible about it either. So it's just in this kind of middle ground of, oh yeah, we go there, and people kind of just forget about it, I guess. And it's maybe one of those ones where if you did have to trim something off the calendar, would we miss it so much, or would we be like, it's a shame, but oh no, never mind anyway, but let's get on with going back to somewhere else instead. So I'm not really sure, to be honest. It's just because, like we've said, it's had some good performances over the years across the board. So it's a bit of an anomaly for me. Maybe Fraser got the inside scoop. Who knows?
Yeah, and I was just going to say that for me, I think it's probably because Hungary isn't located near the Netherlands, and all of the Orange Army are going to well, first of all Zandvoort, but then if not, they're going to Spa and they're going to Spielberg, aren't they? So the Orange Army don't quite make it to Hungary. That's probably the reason at the moment, right? Because everywhere we go in Europe at the moment, there just seems to be orange flares and people having a good time, Dutch people having a good time, right? So yeah, maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
No idea at all, but I think Ellie-May, we're just going to move ahead to qualifying instead because it was quite an interesting one.
Yes, qualifying, obviously, we saw a change in how we do things with F1, making it compulsory that teams had to put a hard set of tyres on for F1, medium set for Q2, and a soft set for Q3. Q1 saw, quite strangely, a very competitive Alfa Romeo, with both drivers putting in a time that topped the order during some stage of the session, with Russell having actually a shock exit after he failed to put in a representative time after getting stuck in traffic. We saw the same thing actually happen with Bottas nearing the end of Q1 as he was ending his lap as others were starting it, this resulting in the lap time being 2 seconds slower than his previous. Luckily for Bottas, he had put in a quick enough lap time to remain out the bottom 5, whilst George Russell had to settle for 18th position on the grid. And then Q2 again, we saw a tight battle, which resulted in Carlos Sainz narrowly missing out on Q3, along with both Alpine Stroll and Daniel Ricciardo. This meant that Q3 saw the two Alfa Romeos, the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg, in the top 10. Both are powered by Ferrari engines, yet only one works Ferrari joined them. And Charles Leclerc didn't even end up being the fastest Ferrari-powered car on the grid, as he was sandwiched between Bottas in 7th and Zhou Guan Yu in 5th, making it Alfa Romeo's best combined quali since Japan 2012. McLaren again had another strong qualifying performance as Oscar Piastri qualified 4th and Lando Norris 3rd. With Red Bull taking the decision to compromise their qualifying pace in order to achieve a better race setup, it led to Sergio Perez qualifying 9th and Max Verstappen 2nd, meaning Lewis Hamilton took a record-breaking 9th pole, the most of any driver at any circuit, and his first pole since Saudi Arabia in 2021. With Hungary being a less power-hungry track, the gap between Hülkenberg in 10th and Hamilton in pole was just 0.55 seconds, equaling the gap between Fernando Alonso in 10th and Ruben Barrichello on pole in Brazil 2003 as the closest top 10 in F1 history. What do you think of the new qualifying format? Do you think it led to this slightly mixed-up grid, or do you think it was down to more external factors?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think the qualifying format probably did make a bit of an impact there. And, George Russell, George Russell missing out, for example. Mercedes didn't seem to be good on the hard tyre this weekend, did they, all weekend long? So I definitely think that made an impact. I would say as well that I think that for example, having a wet P2 really impacted things. We see even with a normal qualifying format, you do generally see that qualifying is a bit mixed up when you have a rained off P1 or P2, for example, where the drivers aren't necessarily able to practice their short runs, for example. So I think that definitely made a bit of an impact on that as well. And then finally, yeah, as you say, the Alfa Romeos, for example, did really well. And I think their new engine has definitely contributed towards that. But the grid in general really seems to be closing up, doesn't it? And I think, if the driver becomes even more important as the grid closes up, it's down to the driver. The driver can make a tenth or two here or there. I don't believe Mercedes had the fastest qualifying car on Saturday, but I think it was Lewis Hamilton himself that really made the time up there and managed to get pole position. I think that was the difference on Saturday, and I think we're seeing that more and more as the grid closes up. So I think it's a combination of things. But the qualifying format, as much as it did mix things up a little bit, did I like it? Yeah, I think I did. I do think I did. I think it definitely makes sense from an environmental perspective, which is what they've obviously brought it in for, which is really, really positive. So yeah, I think let's see it again a couple more times this season at a few different tracks to see how whether it has the same kind of impact elsewhere. But yeah, my first thoughts were reasonably positive, I think.
I think for me, kind of echoing what you were saying there, Fraser, I liked it, but there's a little asterisk at the top there that was where Martin Brundle was there as well. It was like, it mixed things up a bit, but not necessarily in the way that you want completely, because it did throw some of the heavy hitters out a bit early on, which you would have loved to see up in the race, especially now that we know what the race was like, to see what they could have potentially done. And it does feel a little bit manufactured. And then what Lewis was saying, I wanted to echo as well, was this whole thing of there's the environmental aspect to it, which is fair enough, but maybe just still reduce the number of sets of tyres you bring anyway, but then just let strategy come into play there, because potentially that could be even more interesting, and you still save however many tyres it was and how much tonnage per year. I think it was something like 3,000 or 30,000 tons of rubber or something silly like that from being transported around the place. And teams always prefer that strategy to it rather than it being just, this is what you're doing, this is what you're doing, this is what you're doing, because there's not really any scope for them there, which I suppose on the one hand, the only team that benefits in that sense with the lack of strategy needing to be implemented is Ferrari, and they did about as they would normally. So I guess they're the kind of winners from this, but overall it worked and gave us probably, I think, like you were alluding to earlier, the best qualifying we've had since Monaco.
I think the irony out of it all is because they're obviously trying this new format. Obviously, it was meant to be in Imola, that got cancelled, so they moved it to Hungary. The other one is in Monza. Now, these are, I assume, Ferrari make their tyres in Italy, so they've had probably the least travelling distance to take less tyres to a track. So why did they not try this further afield? Why did they say, let's sort of keep it within sort of Italy and sort of nearby? The only thing I can think of is that if it did go so horribly wrong, they didn't have far to go to get, I guess, more tyres. But that's the only reason I can think of why they did it so closely.
But again, you must think that as it's an experiment, would you not have backup sets just in case for that anyway? But again, like you say, common sense in F1 and all of that doesn't always go hand in hand. So your guess is as good as mine. But it's a valid question, and I'd love to know.
Yeah, I did think the same thing as well. Like, if you're going to do it, like, do it in Australia or do it in the
when it can really hamper things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if they run out of tyres, so be it. Do you know what I mean? Let the teams deal with that. If we're in Q3 and Carlos Sainz
has proven several times he only needs 3 wheels to get around a track, so he should be fine anyway.
Exactly that, right? Exactly that. No, I don't know. I just think like let's make the teams work. Let's make the teams deal with it. If they have to put on another set of super softs. I'm living in 2019.
Can you imagine
soft tires. Yeah. If you have to put on another set of soft tires that have already done a few laps, so be it. Just because they're not at their prime, they're not at their optimal. It doesn't mean that they don't work. So I didn't really understand that. Do you know what I also found quite ironic as well was the fact that with Mercedes, for example, where going back to this qualifying system, with some cars working really well on some tyres, but not working very well on other tyres. Mercedes, for example, seemed to really switch on the soft tyres, which was great, but struggled with the medium and hards. And it did leave me wondering if George Russell had have just scraped through Q1 and then maybe scraped through Q2 as well, would he have been on the front row? Would he have been on pole if he'd have actually made it to Q3? Because the Mercedes just got the soft tyres working so quickly. And it did make me wonder, wonder, yeah, he qualified 18th, but could he have been on pole if he was literally just into Q3 and able to use the soft tyres, which I thought was quite an interesting thought.
The last thing I want to say on tyres quickly there is that obviously this year's hards were last year's mediums, I think, if I'm getting that the right way around. So maybe that was why they're doing it in the local vicinity, in case of they're not sure. Maybe they've made these tyres too soft as a next thing, and they're always constantly improving in some ways. But at what point do you say maybe this aspect of it doesn't need improving? Maybe it should be harder for a reason, and maybe it was okay, like you were saying, we need to be closer so we can grab some spare sets in case we need them. Whereas that's potentially more difficult in somewhere like Singapore or Australia. But again, it goes into this whole tyre debate that maybe we can have a whole podcast on at some point, anyway. I know you'd like that probably. So it's maybe that was a contributing factor.
Just going on tyres, because obviously they've added a new tyre spec, haven't they? The C0. I haven't actually seen us use it yet. I don't think. I was trying to sort of write through my memory, but I don't think we've used it. So why is it there?
You're just asking a lot of questions and just hoping Fraser and I know the answers when we're as boggled. You've clearly pointed out you're in the top 1%. You can answer these questions for us.
Where are the tyres? Where do they degrade the most? Where do we use the softest compounded tyres? Is it Monaco? Did we see the C0 in Monaco? I don't know the answer to it, to be honest.
I don't think we would have done because of the conditions, no?
Yeah. Maybe that's what it is. That's why we haven't seen it.
Maybe Monza would see them, just because fast and soft would be the. But again, then do we see them at all because of the qualifying format, or do we just see them maybe in the race? Who knows?
I guess maybe the only thing I can think of is that they had to change the way the tyres work a lot earlier on than they were supposed to. We were meant to have sort of these new tyres that have come in, I think around about now. We were meant to have them next year, sorry. So maybe that's the reason we're now not seeing them, because now the tyres that we are using have changed enough that we don't need the C0.
When you do your tyre podcast, I think you should invite the only Super Mario Isola onto the podcast, and he can answer all the questions. There you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's been on with Inside F2 before, so you never know, right?
Ellie-May will just wheel this whiteboard into the background. Right, these are my questions. This is what I've figured out so far. Fill in the gaps. Go.
And Ted Kravitz. I mean, the man loves tyre chap, so you could have a good little panel there.
That would be a great line. Yeah. Looking towards the race now, and it was a double DNF for Alpine right at the start. Zhou Guanyu suffered anti-stall as the lights went out, becoming bogged down as the drivers went past him. He then tagged the back of Daniel Ricciardo on entry into turn 1, who then caught the back of Ocon, who then countersteered and the hit into Gasly, causing bodywork and internal damage on both cars, forcing them to retire due to no fault of their own. Alpine have been plagued with bad luck this season, and this race was no different. I think what makes it worse is for the team is that McLaren are now leaving Alpine for dust in the constructors, and it doesn't particularly look like they're going to be able to catch up, as they haven't got the performance McLaren do at the moment. They're kind of just in this lull, aren't they? And I don't really know what's going to improve for them.
The thing that amuses me the most about it was just the fact that Zhou is obviously Bottas's teammate. Bottas, famous for stuff on turn 1, lap 1 at the Hungarian Grand Prix, probably looking over him going, traditions, I've taught the boy well.
It wasn't ideal, shall we say, was it, for Alfa Romeo? They had their best qualified, did you say, since Japan 2012, is that right?
Yeah.
And they by the end of lap 1, I don't think they had a driver in the top 10. So I did feel for Alfa Romeo, and I do wonder what their race pace was, because I saw a little graphic going around pre-race, which I don't know how accurate it was, I'm not sure, but it showed Alfa Romeo's race pace as being as good as Red Bull's, which was really interesting. I'm sure that's something maybe from practice 1, practice 2, whereby Alfa Romeo had the engine turned up or something. I'm not sure what it was, but it would have been interesting. I do wonder whether Zhou, for example, could have stayed ahead of the Ferraris and could have,
it would have been fascinating to see if he could have done an Alex Albon essentially and just make the car as wide as the track and keep anyone behind him there, because we don't really get to see him up in those positions very often, if ever, until now. And then it just goes immediately backwards, and you're like, never mind, try again later.
100%.
That was kind of one of the questions I had, because obviously Zhou Guanyu fell back to 16th obviously after the poor start, and then a 5-second penalty for causing the turn 1 collision, which is fair enough. It was, well, do you think if it wasn't for the anti-stall and the collision resulting in the penalty that Zhou could have remained in the points? Could he have, kept off Aston Martin and Ferrari, for instance?
Yes. Yeah, I do think I think he would have been in the points over Stroll, for example. I don't think Aston Martin's pace was particularly great this weekend. Maybe Alonso, who was 15 seconds up the road from Stroll, by the way, would have managed to get himself in the points. But I do think Alfa Romeo, I think they were a quicker car than Aston Martin this weekend. I don't know, they didn't show it in the race, but it would have been interesting to see, wouldn't it? And but again, I just love the fact that the grid is closing up. It really is, isn't it? I know Red Bull are 200 miles out in front of everyone else, but other than that, you look at McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Alfa Romeo joining the party as well. It makes me excited as we move into the second half of the season, because Alpine have been up there at points during this season as well. I remember Gasly running in the top 4 in Melbourne, for example. I think they've been quite unlucky.
Again?
We won't talk about that. They had as bad a result as what they did this weekend, and the British Grand Prix, to be fair. They haven't had any luck, have they?
At least this one, in comparison to Australia, they got it out of the way early doors and didn't get the hopes up and then ruin it at the last moment.
That is very true. Yeah, I don't think the Alpine pace is bad, by the way. They just can't have a clean weekend, can they? But their race pace actually seems all right. I think it's up there with Aston Martin and with Ferrari, for example. So, hopefully they'll have a clean weekend in Spa and we can see their genuine pace.
Yeah, I do as well. They need it because they haven't scored any points for the last 2 races. And then I think Austria, they scored, 1 or 2 with Gasly? So it's not great, but was he head to the other team now that was affected by Zhou Guanyu sort of going bowling, and that was AlphaTauri. With Daniel Ricciardo had a good comeback after being hit at the start of the race to come home in 13th. On the second round of pit stops, he pitted a lot earlier than the others around him, allowing him to regain a few positions, but that would have also sort of been helped by Ricciardo managing his tyres well to then keep that position, as he was on the mediums from lap 29. The others were sort of maybe about 5 laps after we sort of saw maybe the ones around him starting to pit, and Yuki meanwhile had a slow pit stop which hampered his track position, resulting in him falling back to 15th. But Franz Tost has said that it would take Ricciardo 5 or 6 races to get back up to speed, whereas Martin Brundle has said he needs to beat Yuki from the get-go. Where do you fall in your thoughts as to where we should see Daniel Ricciardo's performance as up to scratch as the rest of the grid? Are you sort of with Martin, or are you with Franz and sort of giving him a few races?
Well, the proof is with Martin, surely, because he's gone out and beat him in qualifying in the race straight away, and there we go, job done. Next.
I think my argument to that would be Daniel Ricciardo beat Lando Norris in the first race at McLaren and then proceeded to just not.
True, but at the same time, vastly different teammates and experience levels there. And Ricciardo was obviously coming off the back of a whole kind of team swap, and this time he's had a break for a bit. And I'll go somewhere in the middle then and be diplomatic about it and say that maybe Zandvoort seems like an odd one to go for, because that's going to be a tricky track to do anything there with overtaking, but maybe Monza, he does all right there generally, and obviously he won there last, and I'm not expecting him to necessarily win there this time with the AlphaTauri, although what a Grand Prix we could have if he does. But I think he's done exactly what he needs to do, and it's a shame that he did get tagged by Zhou, because he's another driver there like Zhou we could have seen a lot more out of him, and potentially he would have been the one overtaking Stroll for that P10 and getting that point there, which would have been absolutely perfect, I think, in terms of proving himself there. And it's also worth pointing out that qualifying wise, and this is related to Hulkenberg P10, but didn't actually really go and do much in Q3 at all. So it would have been interesting to see if he could have beaten Perez's time. And if so, Ricciardo would then have only been 3 spots away from Perez in a Red Bull. This being said, he was only 4 spots away from him first time out, and Perez has not really got any excuse for that.
Spa will be interesting, Ellie-May. It will be really interesting to see how close, or if Daniel Ricciardo is in front of Yuki Tsunoda. If he beats him 2 races in a row, okay, I think he's back. Do you know what I mean? And we really, everyone sits up and takes note. But if Yuki Tsunoda goes and beats him in Spa, it's like, okay, where do we sit with it? So Spa will be really interesting. A track
It depends how he gets beaten. If it does one way or the other, is it because of pure pace? Is it because of Spa being Spa and there's an instant into turn 1 or something, or bad strategy? Yeah. What is the reasoning for it?
100%. But it'll be a race winner in Spa, by the way. He goes well there. Do you know what I mean? And holy mac and cheese balls! Is it good to have him back? Right? It's so good, isn't it, to have his smile back on the grid? And I can't wait to have him back on the grid for the rest of the season.
Yeah, under this jumper is an Enchante t-shirt, so I am a Danny Ric fan, but I have done some maths, so I'm not the best at maths, so this could be terrible.
I thought you're top 1%.
So she's coming back down to our level, Fraser.
In the top 1% for like logic.
All right.
And common sense. Maths? Meh. But Yuki Tsunoda's average qualifying position this year has been 14th and finish position is 13th. So I guess Ricciardo needs to be matching that or better. But obviously he's already matching it. I guess the counter argument is that's quantitative data, so it's difficult as, Alpha Tauri are perhaps in a worse position now than they were at the start of the season. But I guess the other thing is to look at is Nick de Vries. His average was 16.9, so almost 17th for qualifying, and then 15.5 for the race. And so the other question, I guess, is would Nick de Vries have qualified 13th at Hungary? And the answer is probably not.
No, I think that says everything you need to know, doesn't it? That I really feel for Nick de Vries. A great driver, a Formula 2 champion, a Formula E champion. You're talking about a guy with real pedigree across motorsport and across different series. But was it harsh? Yes. Did he know going into that seat that it was, it's a bit cutthroat? And yes, he did. I mean, everyone knows what Helmut Marko is like. So if he wasn't performing, he wasn't doing what was required of him, then he was going to get the chop, and that's what ended up happening. Would Nick de Vries have qualified 13th in Budapest? No, I don't think so. Did Daniel Ricciardo get the most out of the car? Yeah, I think he did, and I think that probably justifies their decision in getting Ricciardo in. And I think that this whole thing is not this saga isn't about how good Nick de Vries is and whether Daniel Ricciardo is a better driver than Nick de Vries. I think this is about Sergio Perez and putting a bit of pressure on Sergio Perez and what Red Bull do. I mean, Red Bull are in a win-win by having Daniel Ricciardo in the car, and if Daniel Ricciardo turns out to be great, he puts a bit of pressure on Sergio Perez and they have options. If Yuki Tsunoda went and beat Daniel Ricciardo, then how good is Yuki Tsunoda? Do you know what I mean? Is that they're saying Yuki Tsunoda is ready to jump in a Red Bull and he could perhaps replace Sergio Perez? So I don't think this thing was ever about, Nick de Vries and Daniel Ricciardo, who is the better driver. But I do think this weekend is probably, and I will see going into Spa if Daniel Ricciardo beats Yuki Tsunoda again. But I do think it's about testing Daniel Ricciardo and also testing Yuki Tsunoda and also putting a bit of pressure on Sergio Perez. So yeah, it's almost become a bit of probably one of the main talking points this season, right? Because the races haven't exactly been great, have they? So yeah.
You must have listened to our preview. That was pretty much my argument at the with the Daniel Ricciardo chat, but I said I think we need to look at the bigger picture, and this is more about Sergio Perez underperforming rather than Nick de Vries underperforming, and Red Bull are looking at their options as to who might be in that second seat next year.
To be fair, he was talking there, and I was like, "This sounds like I've heard this somewhere before." I was trying to think, have I been having a conversation with someone on Messenger, like just off screen? That was Fraser. This rings a bell from somewhere.
I agree with what you guys are saying, though. I mean, I agree with what you said in the preview that this is about Sergio Perez for me, and I don't even know if it's for 2024. Maybe it's for 2025. I don't know.
My only thing on that is I just don't see the point in putting Ricciardo in an AlphaTauri for a full season next year. It seems that especially if he can do what we think he can do, it seems that then you're wasting that talent. Of like Max has made no qualms about wanting him in the Red Bull.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind having a bit more of a challenge for P1, because then if he gets beaten, he won't mind too much, I don't think, overall, because he'd like, at least I got it fair and square. Because I mean, he probably, as much as he hated battling Lewis, he loved it as well, because you know that you're really earning that championship in a whole other regard. And if you beat him, well, you beat Daniel Ricciardo in a Red Bull, and you definitely have at least one championship that doesn't have any controversy attached to it then. Which is what he really needs at this point. He has one that gets done awkwardly. The second one, Japan, was a mess. This one, you're like, well, you have no competition if you're going to be going down that route. So, like, someone please let this man just have a break and have a normal championship.
Can you imagine, though, Daniel Ricciardo jumps in the Red Bull for 2024 and wins the championship? He beats Max Verstappen to the championship. I mean, that would be one of the greatest comebacks of all time. You know, Renault didn't really work out. McLaren definitely didn't work out. Loses his race seat on the grid for 2023. Comes back in an AlphaTauri and does well, and then goes on to carry the momentum through to beat Max Verstappen, one of the greatest of all time, to win the championship. I mean, that would be one of the greatest comeback of all time, stories of all time, right?
I'm writing that down now on the Excel sheet for next year for you, Fraser.
Get on the yeah, make a record of it, definitely.
It's honestly what I dream of.
Yeah.
What were your dream of, Ellie-May?
Yeah. I mean, the last time he was in the Red Bull 2018. That was the last one? Yeah.
2018, yeah.
Obviously, Max beat him then, but obviously Ricciardo, I think from memory, was pretty badly plagued with reliability issues. If you then go a couple years back again, Ricciardo was beating Verstappen outright. And Vettel, yes. So
don't get me wrong. I do have to say I don't think Ricciardo is a better driver than Verstappen. By the way, I don't think that Ricciardo will get in the Red Bull and be anywhere near as good as Verstappen.
How is he winning that championship, Fraser?
Well, maybe Max has some bad reliability, like when Rosberg won a championship in 2016. I don't know, mate. I don't know. But the other side to this that we haven't spoken about is obviously AlphaTauri having a rebrand next year, right? And there's some new personnel coming in. Obviously,
Ronchante team.
Exactly that, and yeah, part of me does wonder, like, what if part of the rebrand is Ford coming in and there's something there, and they're not necessarily going to be a Red Bull second team, a Red Bull junior team. Maybe it's more of a rebranded team that, yes, is associated with Red Bull, but isn't necessarily a B team or a junior team. And they want Daniel Ricciardo to lead on that push. He's a very marketable driver, obviously. Maybe they want Daniel Ricciardo to come in and be a lead driver in a new reformed team, which isn't a junior team, which isn't a B team. It's more of an actual team that has a little bit of a partnership with Red Bull, for example. I don't know. But
I'll tell you what, then, the last thing before we move this conversation on to other bits of the race.
Yes.
I will take your prediction for next year. Apply it to 2025, but Ricciardo does it in AlphaTauri in whatever that team is then called.
What, he wins the championship in the AlphaTauri or whatever it's called?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, I'm here for it. I mean, anything other than Red Bull winning right now, I'm here for it. But and that's no disrespect to Red Bull. I have to say that's not because I don't like Red Bull. It's just because it's a bit boring, isn't it? Max Verstappen winning every single race. So
we've got to bring the competition to Verstappen. But one team that probably isn't doing it is Haas. They're in a similar situation every weekend, really. Hulkenberg does well in qualifying, and then both Haas's just cook their tyres and they're nowhere in the race. But something we haven't really touched upon in this podcast, I think, because other drivers have sort of maybe been underperforming, is do we think Kevin Magnussen has a seat for Haas next year? Is he performing as we expect for a Haas, or could he be doing better? Again, if you look at averages, Nico Hulkenberg is qualifying 10th and finishing on average in 14th, but has all but 2 of Haas's points. Magnussen is qualifying 15.5 and averaging, funnily enough, in 14th, which is actually the same as Hulkenberg, but Haas and Williams are on the same points, but with countback, Williams are in 7th, whilst Haas are in 8th. So even if they aren't fighting for points every race, they need to have as high a finish as they can if they want to overtake Williams, as obviously there's a few £1 million different between finishing 7th and 8th in the Constructors. So am I being a bit harsh if I say, is that down to perhaps Magnussen? Or, I mean, do we think...
I don't think you're being harsh with that. I think that, and it's very telling what Gunter was saying recently, that Hulk, he wants to extend the contract there. Magnussen will see, essentially, which, considering his comeback story and everything, it would be a shame if he then left under this kind of another quiet exit from Haas with not really achieving too much aside from a pole position in spectacular style. If he did go, though, I couldn't blame them. And also they might want to try something different there. It's just the awkward thing of what I want is what they've said they won't do for a long time, which is put a rookie in the car, because I want Vesti to go there from F2. But if they want another experienced driver, I don't know who you get for that.
I've got my own theory on it, team. I know we've spoken about this. I think this comes back to, which is currently Alfa Romeo, Sauber. And Sauber have got quite a talented rookie in Formula, as well, not a rookie, his first season in Formula 2, but he would be a rookie in Formula 1 in the name of Thiemo Pourchaire, and I think he'll go on to win the Formula 2 championship, and he's quite a talented individual, is young Thiemo, Monaco winner at 17 years old in Formula 2, the youngest Formula 2 winner, I think they've invested an awful lot in his junior career. They're paying for his entire Formula 2 season this season, which is pretty unheard of. And I think they're ready to put Thiemo Pourchaire in the Sauber car, which will be the Sauber next season. And it's the Sauber Academy that have carried him through. And I think they'll put him alongside Valtteri Bottas. I think Bottas's experience will be valuable to young Thiemo Pourchaire. And obviously, and that would be very harsh on Zhou Guanyu. And I'm a big fan of Zhou Guanyu. I think he's done a really good job this season and last season as well in his rookie season. But yeah, when you look at, I'm just having a look at the points that he got. It wasn't very many last season. It was a solid rookie season, but it wasn't very many. 4 points this season. Yeah, is that good enough for a team like Alfa Romeo who are looking at?
Is it good enough for a team like Haas?
Well, and this is what I was just about to say, that, you know, I think he brings a lot of money, right? And one of the highest amount of money on the F1 grid, right? Haas absolutely love a bit of money, don't they? So if Zhou Guanyu is available and Haas do fancy an experienced driver, they're not going to go for a rookie. We know that because Gunther Steiner absolutely despises rookies off the back of Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin's experience. Yeah, if they want an experienced driver who brings a bit of money in, then Zhou Guanyu ticks both boxes there. And if there's also a few rumours circulating that, Alfa Romeo, yes, they're not going to be in a Formula 1 team next year. If they go over with their title sponsorship over to Haas as well, you could have an Alfa Romeo Haas with a Zhou Guanyu in the seat, bringing a lot of money alongside Nico Hulkenberg. And I don't think that's a bad little team, Alfa Romeo Haas with Hulkenberg and Zhou Guanyu. I think that's a nice little team. So, I'm throwing that out there early doors. Timo, whack it on your spreadsheet. That's a bold prediction for next season.
That's interesting, because I've always sort of seen it that Zhou Guanyu's done better than Bottas this season. But equally...
Can we compare? So I'm just looking at it now. So 2022, Valtteri Bottas, 49 points. Zhou Guanyu, 6 points. Right? Fast forward to 2023, driver's standings. Valtteri Bottas, 5 points. Zhou Guanyu, 4 points. Yeah, fair enough. A lot closer. But they've had a pretty rubbish car this season. I think that's fair to say. Zhou did really well this weekend, didn't he? Obviously out-qualified Valtteri Bottas up in P5, but has he done enough over 2 seasons to warrant him being the one that they keep over a multiple race winner and a guy with a lot of experience, Valtteri Bottas? I don't know. Not for me anyway.
That's interesting. I mean, yeah, as well, Zhou Guan Yu could just move to Haas in his own right, and that'll be the first non-blonde since Roman Grosjean in 2020.
It'll be in the contract.
That's an amazing
to dye it.
He'll have to do an Alex Albon, and
Albon will just sneak over to the garage and like, I've got to fix this for you. You're not allowed in otherwise.
That's an amazing stat. I love that, Ellie-May.
Thanks. Well, we may as well then obviously move on to Williams and Haas's, I guess, closest rival at the minute, with them being on equal points. And I'd say they sort of had a quiet race, really. I don't think there was much to report on their race other than sort of Sargent spinning at the end and retiring, but because it was sort of within the last few laps, he still classified in 18th, and sort of Albon finished just out the points in 11th. It's not obviously not as a strong performance as Silverstone. I think they're just kind of there.
Yeah, I mean, it was an odd one, I think, because they predicted that their next points would be Budapest and Spa, and then they obviously got them a lot sooner than they thought in previous races. And here they got close again, but again, I think it's not a bad thing either, because, you're still better than a lot of the other teams and not a million miles away from Aston Martin, if you look at it from Albon's perspective there. And Sargent, again, rookie season, but doing quite well with the tools given to him. So I think, there's not a lot to report there, but it's in a weirdly more positive sense than Aston Martin, who there's not a lot to report there, and that's worrying.
Yeah, for me, I mean, Williams, track didn't suit them. They'll be in the points in Spa next.
We'll move on to Aston Martin then. Both drivers obviously in the points, P9 for Alonso, 10th for Stroll, but it's obviously a downward trajectory from where they were at the start of the season, with McLaren and Mercedes bringing upgrades, sort of Ferrari sort of sometimes being better than them, sometimes not. Where do you think we see Aston Martin's trajectory going for the rest of the season? And do we think McLaren could overtake them in the Constructors?
I don't know about the Constructors, but if my depressing theory is correct, then maybe, because it seems that they're doing an extreme version of a Haas year. Let's have a great first stint and then drop off dramatically and wonder what the hell happened.
Do you think it could partially be down to the fact that they're moving into a new factory? They're not so much looking at their upgrades at the minute. Maybe upgrades will come later in the year. They're just sort of getting settled in, and maybe priority has been on that a bit more.
Perhaps, and I think it's like what Fraser was saying with Williams, might just be a bit more track dependent. We've seen them stronger earlier on in the season. It'd be interesting to see what they're like in Singapore, for example, because they do well in some of the street circuits. Baku wasn't one of them, but they still didn't do badly by any stretch of imagination. Whereas we've seen Mercedes come and go, kind of this yo-yo effect, and then McLaren make this giant jump, and we're like, is that just because of the upgrades, or is that because of the track? We need a bit more time to find out. So I think it's just the rest of the field bunching up a bit, and Aston Martin not expecting to do what they already did this year in some ways. So they would have been happy with this, but because we're used to seeing Alonso on the podium now, we're like, well, come on, get on with it then. You were doing so well, and now we're disappointed with P9 for Alonso, whereas before we'd have been like, oh no, we take that actually, and we should be pretty happy with that.
I think so Fernando Alonso maybe let one slip, if you like, over the weekend, and said that it's something to do with, or he believes anyway, that it's something to do with the new tyre compound that was introduced in Silverstone that just doesn't suit the Aston Martin. So that's really interesting. The team haven't said that. That was what Fernando Alonso said. I don't know whether he was meant to say that or not. But
it's hard to know with Alonso if he means it all or not. Anyway,
it is, isn't it? If he's bluffing, or who knows what's going on with Fernando Alonso. What I do have to say is, anyway, it's a really interesting question that you've just posed, in that, is the factory getting in the way of their upgrades a little bit. I do have to say, with that team, regardless of if they how they end up doing from now until the end of the season, they are building the infrastructure to be a top team with years to come. And I think, we will see them. They will have a seriously competitive car again next year. And I think moving into 25, particularly 26 with the new regulations, with Honda coming back and working with Honda, I think they really could be a championship winning car for years to come, whether that be with Fernando Alonso or probably Fernando Alonso. Actually, he'll still be there in 2030, won't he? So
it was the interesting stat I read this morning was that who was it now? I think it was Jack Brabham was accused of being too old at 40 in 1966, I think, of being at Silverstone, the Grand Prix. So he came onto the grid with a walking stick and a fake beard, and then went on to win the championship that year. And I just that's probably Alonso's relative somehow in the mix there. There's some DNA thrown in for that.
That's a bit like Nigel Mansell was 39 when he won, and that was an exceptionally difficult car to drive. In theory, they are easier now in some respect with power steering and whatnot. So,
okay, then we're gonna nail this in now, Fraser, Ellie-May. Ricciardo next year with the Red Bull Championship, Alonso in 25, Lewis in 26 to get that eighth championship in the third different era, I guess, and then he can leave. And then I don't care after that, because look at those 3 years that we've had.
It would be
probably a Ferrari out of mercy in 2028 to make it 20 years since Kimi.
Well, I was just going to say perhaps Lewis Hamilton wins in a Ferrari, because he does want to. He always said he wanted to move over to Ferrari. Maybe
for World Endurance Championship, not for F1.
But we'll move on to Ferrari then, and they also, like Aston Martin, scored double points with a P8 and P7 for Sainz and Leclerc respectively. Sainz took a different strategy to most by starting on the soft compound, which helped him jump up from 11th to 6th, but ultimately tyre degradation got the better of Ferrari on both the softs and the hards, and were really struggling towards the end. Leclerc didn't have much better time of it, receiving a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Apparently as well, it wasn't even a lot. Apparently it was like less than 1 kilometre an hour. Is that what they...
That's such a Ferrari thing to do, though.
I know.
Can't even speed properly.
And also they then had a horrible 9.4 second pit stop for good measure. I mean, with Ferrari off the pace, I guess it looks like their closest rivals at the moment are Aston Martin, who have also sort of, I guess, fallen off the pace as well. And it's both those teams, it seems to be very track specific with them both. And I don't know.
You say track specific, but Ferrari, does it really matter where they are for them to do anything?
Specific.
Yeah.
Then they had softs left over, so they thought, why don't we just put signs on the softs? Look how that sort of worked out. I guess it didn't work out too badly, but
I think part of the mismatch on the strategy is that they keep prioritizing Leclerc over Sainz, and it's not always clear why. It's just, yes, he's there longer. Yes, he's your golden boy, but Sainz might actually be able to do something in the specific race, and there's more of that happening, and Sainz kind of has to call out the strategists over and over again, like, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to do this instead, because ignoring them and making his own thing is how they won their last Grand Prix. So maybe the guy knows what he's doing.
Guys, can we not sugarcoat this? They finished 70 seconds off the lead. They're almost lapped. We're talking about the team who were the second best team in Formula 2 last year. Probably the second best. Sorry, Formula 1. Sorry, Formula 2. The second best.
Second best in Formula 2. Something's really gone wrong, mate.
I talk about Formula 2 too much, don't I? You can tell. The second best team in Formula 1 last year. The second best team at the start of this season, the team that were challenging for Red Bull the most, Charles Leclerc, had a pole in round 4. 70 seconds. They haven't learned from their strategy mistakes. They're still making mistakes. The drivers are still making errors. I don't know, guys. I don't think we can sugarcoat this and say, oh, yeah, it's not a bad weekend. It's not all. It is pretty dreadful, isn't it? For Ferrari, the team with the most history, the most money, right?
They've only been racing since 1929.
Yeah,
You can't
true.
expect them to get everything right.
They need a few more years to learn, don't they? A few more learning years. Oh, God, it's just
I just want to conduct an experiment now and have you on the podcast for a few more weeks just to see if we can get a couple of grey hairs just from Ferrari.
honestly. I don't know. That team is underperforming massively. And for me, last year, you look at them and you think, wow, okay, Ferrari are back. We haven't seen Ferrari regularly at the front since 2018, 2019. Even then, they're not the well, definitely not 2019, actually 2018, when that 2018, 2017. So and before then, it's years before that. I just think this is a team that are massively underperforming. And fair enough, Fred Vasseur's gone in there and we should give him a bit more time. I don't think we should judge him in the first 10 races of the 10, 11 races of the season. I think he needs a bit more time. But right now, guys, they're really underperforming. No, I don't know. Maybe I'm being really harsh.
Oh, they
I don't
are.
know.
They are. We're just getting really depressed talking about it, I think. So we need someone else to do it for us.
We've got sort of a bit delusional. We sort of just leave Ferrari in a corner, kind of just try and ignore them. But I think I guess apart from the real Hamilton dominance era, I think I remember sort of my dad saying that before that, Ferrari was seen as a bit of a joke because they weren't doing particularly well. So I guess they do just kind of have these ups and downs. They can't stay very consistent. And it's probably some of that is down to maybe favouring a driver more than the other. You've got to think they favour Leclerc, yet Sainz and Leclerc have been a pairing for 3 years now, and Sainz is beat Leclerc in the first year. Leclerc then obviously beat Sainz the second year, but now Sainz is beating Leclerc again. Why are they sitting on Sainz? It doesn't make sense. They need to, if they were fighting for a championship and it kind of gets to that point in the season where you're like, okay, we need to start favouring a driver more now because we need to sort of prioritise them winning a championship, then fair enough. But that's not the case. So you kind of need to work together a bit more. Otherwise, Sainz is going to look elsewhere, which we've predicted that he will just move to Audi.
If I was Charles Leclerc, I'd be looking elsewhere, by the way. I think I would. And I think I'd be fed up with it. And I think if you're Carlos Sainz, then yeah, like why not go to Audi? Why not go and be part of a new project and be the main driver there, be the lead driver? And if I was Charles Leclerc, I'd be saying, as soon as Lewis Hamilton retires, get me in a Mercedes. So sorry, let's talk about Mercedes. But just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. But it was a P6 for George and P4 for Hamilton in what I'd say was a slightly strange weekend for the team. I mean, Russell had a great recovery drive after a terrible qualifying session to finish obviously sixth after Charles Leclerc's 5-second penalty, swapping them around. However, he's quickly closing down. Yeah, he was quickly closing down on the Ferrari anyway, and he would have caught him probably with a few more laps to go. And Hamilton obviously fell down to fourth at the start and somewhat struggled for pace whilst the car was heavily fueled. And sort of once that fuel had burnt off a bit, the Mercedes seemed to come alive again in the closing sort of quarter, maybe third of the race to come home in fourth. But Mercedes obviously still seem to be struggling to understand how their car works, but they did have a quick car this race. So do you think Hungary was a step in the right direction for Mercedes, or do you think they could have done actually better this weekend looking at sort of their pace?
No, I think it's kind of where you expect it in some ways and outperformed others because, like Fraser was saying, we weren't expecting Lewis to get pole. That was Lewis getting the maximum and then some out of the car. George buggered by the qualifying, but doing what he's good at and making his way through the field. And I think with the strength of that McLaren coming out of nowhere and Red Bull Ring being Red Bull, that's kind of the best they could have hoped for, really. And it's an awkward thing because if you'd had a few more laps, maybe Lewis could have at least made it go for P3 and been on the podium. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's just we're not sure. We know it's the right direction. We just don't know. We can't see the path. We just know it's the right direction.
See, I think he should have got third.
Oh, we should have, but we needed 2 more laps. It's the classic racing driver thing of just give me 1 more lap and I can do that.
I mean, he was able to overtake Piastri. So why couldn't he sort of then get?
You just couldn't get close enough in time. You just run out of laps. I think that's. I'm going to stick by that party line. To be honest.
Yeah, Piastri cooked his tyres, which I think is why he managed to get past Piastri so easily. For me as well, you got to bear in mind that this is a Red Bull that Max Verstappen won the race by 30 seconds in. It's a very competitive Red Bull, and for Lewis Hamilton to actually be making progress on Perez at the end of the race, albeit with Perez having cooked his tyres as well. I think I don't know. Maybe it's. I thought it was quite impressive from Lewis Hamilton, and the Mercedes seemed quick as well at the end of the stint, which was really weird because it didn't correlate with their pace throughout the race, which I thought was really.
That's
odd.
the thing that confuses everyone the most about, including Mercedes, is we're really strong and we don't know why in places we don't know why, and then the places we think we should have everything, we don't know why that's gone wrong either. So everyone's just like, what do we do with this information?
Move on to McLaren now, and it was a respectable second for Norris. He took his first consecutive podium, and first podium for McLaren at Hungaroring since Lewis Hamilton in 2012, and it was then a fifth place finish for Piastri. With Piastri was actually obviously running ahead of Norris at the start of the race, but Norris got the undercut on his teammate in the first round of pit stops. Despite actually Piastri's pit stop was quicker, it just ended up that Norris just had such a good outlap that he managed to get the undercut when not many other drivers did. So I don't think that was any sort of calculating move with McLaren. It just kind of happened.
It felt like one though, because we're all just wanting Piastri to do well. Just like, damn it, Norris, well, let the boy on the podium.
Yeah, it sort of, I guess, when looking at F1 teams, you always question motives and whatnot. But then a slower pit stop in the second round for Piastri then left Piastri running about sort of second in front of Perez. As I think it was something like Piastri did it wasn't an exceptionally slow pit stop. It was something about like 2.8, but Perez 1.9 seconds, and obviously with the Red Bull behind you, he couldn't keep that couldn't keep Red Bull behind him. And then Hamilton obviously got the young Aussie as well, and it was like you're saying, Fraser. I think the main takeaway from McLaren is that definitely Piastri here is that he probably needs better tyre management, but obviously this will come in time. Other than that, I think it was a strong performance for Piastri, and he's still a rookie. He didn't obviously have a seat in anything last year. He's still doing pretty well to sort of almost be nearing the podiums.
McLaren are cooking, aren't they? They're absolutely. I mean, I didn't expect them to be anywhere. I knew around Silverstone they might be competitive because that car seems to suit that track. Whether or not they could then do that in Budapest at a track that they, historically haven't really suit. Their car didn't really suit the low speed corners, and the fact that they've done that in Hungary, and they were just, in my opinion, the second quickest team in Hungary. I mean, they are back. They're back for good, and they're the closest team to Red Bull, which for the rest of the season could be fascinating. I know we'll talk maybe about Spa at some point. I think they're going to be really. That track is going to suit the McLaren even more than what Budapest did this weekend, and I think McLaren could be pretty mega around Spa. Oscar Piastri, he cooked his tyres. He'll learn from that. He's had a really good start to the season, so I don't think anyone can fault him for that. And Lando Norris just doing Lando Norris things, just being great, right? And P2 is a really solid effort. So McLaren 10 out of 10 from me. I think they're as I said, they're doing really well, aren't they?
Only thing I've got to add on to that is that you mentioning 2012, both of you there. That is also the last time they got back-to-back podiums with Button and Hamilton, Brazil and Austin, I think it was. So that's I'm kind of glad they're breaking those records, but it doesn't remind you of those records. You're like, Jesus, it's been a while, hasn't it?
But I definitely think it's good that, because we've seen with a lot of teams, it's been very track specific. Aston Martin and Mercedes especially, it's been very, very track specific. Whilst Austria, Silverstone, and Hungary, I'd say, were very different tracks. And the McLaren has excelled in all three of them with the new upgrades. Obviously, Piastri didn't have them in Austria, so I think this is a sign for good things to come. Hopefully, anyway.
But why do you jinx it?
Yeah.
Wow.
But for me, guys, I mean, this the McLaren is a baseline for next season, right? And I just think they're going to build on this. They're going to, if the 2024 McLaren could be a championship winning car, which is really, really exciting, a race winning car at the very least. And it excites me thinking that, as long as Red Bull don't come out of a car that is 2 laps quicker than everyone else over a race distance, I think you could have Red Bull, McLaren. I think Ferrari could potentially be up there. Mercedes are going to be back. Maybe Aston Martin.
I do love that you proceed to just absolutely dump on Ferrari, but Ferrari, they could be up there next year. He still believes.
I have trust in our friend Fred Vasseur. He's a feeder series legend, isn't he? And for me, he could do a good job there. So why not? Let's have 5 teams going for the championship. Let's have 7 different winners in 7 different races at the start of 2012, like we had back then. I mean,
don't give me hope like that. Don't give me hope like that. Not after this year.
Well, Red Bull obviously have less money and less time to do upgrades, but obviously they came with upgrades this race to help with the cooling of their car, which ultimately I think obviously helped with the hot conditions for the race. Perez having a good recovery drive to obviously take third, getting his elbows out really during overtakes, but ultimately couldn't catch Lando due to the back markers causing traffic. And then fell off the pace a bit once he got past them, and Max just took the lead early in turn 1, and then in usual Max Verstappen fashion just continued to lead the entire race really with very little tyre degradation and like we said, a 33-second lead in front of Norris in P2, making this his 7th consecutive win and Red Bull's 12th, breaking McLaren's record of 11 consecutive wins from 1988 with the MP44. In a few years to come, do you think we will hold the RB19 in the same regard as Prost and Senna's MP44? Will it sort of have the same recognition, do you think?
Can I question whether, I mean, yes, 12 consecutive race wins, but that is 11 consecutive race wins this season and 1 from last season, right? And the McLaren record was all in the same season. So, yes, it was.
You're really sticking a lot on Spa, aren't you?
I'm not having it until they win Spa. If they win Spa, I'm like, yeah, fair enough. I get it. Like, yeah, I'll hold that car in the same regard as the 88 McLaren. But until they win Spa, I don't think I buy that. I don't know. Maybe I'm being really picky. I don't know. I don't think you can use the car.
I think the thing for me is that you also think about how different that McLaren was in '88, and you can have it's got the record. It will have the record probably. Fingers crossed it doesn't. And that's all very well and good, but it's also it's like trying to compare Fangio and Schumacher, because you've just got such different eras that I'm not saying it's easier now, but it's just there's a different difficulty level with it, and it doesn't feel. I feel like there's a certain cutoff point with the classic F1 stuff where it's a whole other ball game, and it's the earlier you do it, the more impressive it is, because the less you have available to you. So I'm not trying to take anything away from Red Bull necessarily there, but because it's impressive with what they've got. But I just wonder, could they have done that back in '88? Probably not.
Completely agree with you, man.
They might have with Adrian Newey. You've got to think
he didn't do it then, did he? So,
well, no, because he was what? Either he wasn't in F1, or if he was with March at that point. It wasn't until he moved.
His excuses. That's all I'm hearing.
Well, he went to Williams and won the championship straight away, and then he did the same with McLaren.
If he could do us all a favour and go to Williams again and fix them, because I would have no problem with 10 straight years of Williams domination after everything we've been going through. We get Alex Albon and Logan Sargent as multiple world champions each, please, and thank you. Goodbye.
Can you imagine? That'd be unbelievable, wouldn't it? Can we say as well, like, people talk about who's the greatest of all time in Formula One. Some people say Michael Schumacher, some people say Senna, Fangio, etc., etc. the greatest of all time is Adrian Newey. I don't care what anyone says, right? The guy is an absolute genius. He has made a bigger impact on Formula One than what any of those drivers have done. And he's still at it. He's still at it. Do you know what I mean? Winning championship after championship. And this won't be his last championship. That'll be a Red Bull.
I think that should be a thing that they have in the regulations. Whoever does worse in the championship gets Newey. He's got to fix you, and then he goes back to the next worst team and just brings everyone back up.
Well, there you go. They'll just send him to Alfa Tauri next year, or whatever that's going to look like. And Daniel Ricciardo wins the championship. We're back to Ricciardo winning the championship. So
see, I've got logic in here somewhere.
Well, it was like how we were saying when they took wind tunnel time away from Red Bull. We were like, is that really going to have an effect on them? Maybe we should have sort of less Adrian Newey time instead.
Love that. Amazing.
Can you imagine a blindfold on him?
Blunt his pencil or something, because he still draws on paper, doesn't he?
It's an amazing record though, isn't it? And Red Bull, I think they will go and win Spa, and I think they'll go 13. Now, how far can they extend that record? That's gonna be really interesting, isn't it? So it's a great record. Well done to Red Bull. It's an amazing achievement, and we'll see what they can do for the rest of the season, because the next one will be how many wins in a season they can get, right? I mean, I'm sure they're going to break that record as well. So it's an amazing team, and we are watching history right now, which is an amazing thing. So
we'll move on then to our winners and spinners, which we'll zip through quickly, because I think we've pretty much said all the reasons for our winners and spinners already here. For me, George Russell for his recovery drive. It's exactly what a second driver or a second driver, but not necessarily a second driver, needs to do in a top team like that in order to make sure that you bring the points home at the end of the day. So easy one for me. Ellie-May?
I've gone for McLaren, as obviously we've mentioned early on. Strong, consistent drive from both drivers for pretty much the third time in the row, especially as these are very different circuits, with it indicating obviously that this isn't a track-specific performance as we've seen with other teams, so they may not fluctuate as much. This could just be an upward trajectory.
Fraser, your winner?
Yeah, you can't argue with McLaren, can you? The other one for me is Lewis Hamilton. I think it was a spectacular lap on Saturday, and even though Sunday didn't necessarily go to plan for Mercedes and for Lewis Hamilton, I think he outperformed the car on Saturday, and that lap was putting a Mercedes where he absolutely should not have been. And maybe people are going to
position.
104. You can't argue with it, can you? You can't argue with it. And
it's also worth noting as well that over in IndyCar, Will Power had the record for 68 pole positions and still has that record because he beat it twice on Saturday. So now has the 69th and 70th pole position to his career. So it's a good day for people who get pole position. Spinners wise, Ellie-May, it's an obvious one, but it's an obvious one.
Alpine, they just can't catch a break.
No, they cannot. Zhou, for me, I'm afraid. I mean, there's just not much to say about Alpine. It's just try and go back to the drawing board there. Zhou, there was so much potential there, and it's a shame to have seen it wasted. Maybe it's a little unfair to say, but he's the one in the car at the end of the day, so tough break for me. Fraser?
Logan Sargent, he literally spammed, so that's the reason for that one. And Aston Martin, I mean, yeah, they've just backpedaled so far since the start of the season. So yeah.
So for Constructors Countdown, despite a change in drivers, Alfa Tauri still remain at the bottom of the standings in B10. Alfa Romeo are P9, whilst Haas remain in P8, tying on 11 points with Williams, who sit in P7 on countback. A pointless weekend in more than one sense of the word sees Alpine stay in P6, their gap from McLaren ahead in P5 worsening from 12 points to 40 as we move into Spa. Ferrari outscored Aston Martin, closing the gap from P4 to P3, now down to 17. Aston Martin hold on to P3, while in P2, Mercedes lost touch ever more with the Red Bull ahead. And in P1, over double the haul of P2 with 452 points, it's Red Bull.
Madness.
And I know. And now going into our predictions review.
Also madness.
Also madness. 1 point for both Jesse and Georgia for their max win, 2 points for Thiemo for max win and Norris second, and 4 points for me for the max win, fastest lap, Norris second, and Ricciardo beating Yuki in quali and the race. Thank
I
you.
said to her earlier, Fraser, she's like the Max Verstappen this year, and I'm just Alonso, Perez, and Hamilton all rolled into one, and I still can't touch her. I get a chip away, and then she does something like this, and I'm like, come on, mean.
It's a great prediction, man. Anyway, if you want to give me next week's lottery numbers, then feel free.
If I could do that, I would.
It'd be your kind of luck of giving him the numbers, he wins. But if you chose the numbers for yourself, you wouldn't win.
Maybe we'll have to do a deal, but I'll get a few million if I do.
Amazing.
F1 fancy review wise for Budapest, we had Alex H9V2 and Alex H9 in the top two positions there. So both his teams did very well, 354 points and 332 points respectively. And P3 was Francisco Road with 313 points. EMT Racing was P8 with 262 points, and on the curbs with P14 on 200. So only a decent gap there as per usual. Overall, Francisco Rhodes with 3,326 points now, Alex H9V2 with 3,320, and then ARG making a good appearance there with 3,288 points. EMT Racing still P8 with 2,815 points, but I am getting there slowly and surely. I don't know if it's going to be enough in time for the end of the season at this rate, probably not, but P12, 2,469 points, and interestingly, Please Subscribe is now in P33 with 815 points to its name and has solidified its place now at the very bottom of the pack on our Fantasy F1 League.
Do you know what the irony is? I kicked out Nick de Vries in my F1 Fantasy League, and then a couple of days later, he got kicked out of F1.
Stop doing things. It's not Marco we've got to worry about, it's Ellie-May. And I think it's ridiculous that you two are good like that.
If you could get rid of Max Verstappen from your fantasy team.
No, he's got double he's got the double thing on my so
yeah, it sounds like that's double reason to get rid, I reckon.
I appreciate the effort there, Fraser. I need all the help I can get in one of these championships at least. And on that bombshell, I think that's all we've got time for this week's episode. Though, thanks again, Fraser, for coming on. If people want to see more of you, where can we find you in the meantime?
Yeah, over on Inside F2. At F2 Inside on Twitter, at Inside Formula 2 on Instagram. And yeah, go and check out our YouTube channel, Inside F2. We've got loads of podcasts, loads of driver interviews. Recently sat down with Brad Benavides, which is a really interesting interview. That's where you can find me.
Ellie-May, yourself?
You can find me doing the graphics on our Instagram page or our TikToks. We've got stuff from Goodwood on there, so take a look at that. And we will have hopefully some content from the Formula Prix in London as well, as I'm going there on Saturday. So make sure you look out for that.
As for myself, you could find me over on Is It Fast on the Curbs, the Nitro RX podcast, Paddock Sorority, and Instagram, and as well, not necessarily the weekend. I'll be posting this stuff. I'll find out. We'll have an absolute mismatch of content if you're at the Formula Ellie-May, but I'll be at the F1 Academy in Castellet, so I'll try and get some footage and pictures from there as well. So we'll have a busy weekend, and maybe we'll actually watch some Formula One as well over all of that. Who knows? Anyway, that is all we've got time for, so we'll see you all very soon, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.